Hello and what is up, YouTube? It's G3Iron here, your balding, bearded friend, with all of the exciting news coming out about the upcoming 321 Crucible League. It is time for hype season to be here. So be prepared. There's going to be lots of video discussions, not just from me, but from everybody that's excited or angry about Path of Exile and its latest, newest patch that is coming out, available to play on PC April 7th and on console April 12th. For today's discussion, we're going to be focusing in on the reality that Crucible is coming, and there's lots of exciting things to discuss that are attached with that, and I can't wrap my head around why certain people and a certain segment of the Path of Exile community seems to have an axe to grind already, less than 24 hours after an incredibly exciting league has been announced, including a bunch of new features added and a bunch of reworks to old beloved content. I just can't wrap my head around, and I'm an old grouchy guy. I can get grouchy about a lot of things. I can't figure out why we're getting grouchy right away with the new league announcement. I don't get it. The only thing I've got for this league is excitement with a little twinge of nervousness, just because my beloved summoners didn't necessarily get any direct buffs. But that's it. That's it. That's the only thing I'm concerned about. Anyway, so that's my opinion right away from the get-go. If you want to hear more about it, then of course, stick around for the rest of the discussion, where at the end of it, I'll ask you for your opinions about what you're excited about and what you're nervous about going into 321 Crucible League. Without any further ado, let's jump in and see what we're getting and why I think it's exciting. Our list of things that we are getting during the Crucible League that is exciting starts off with simply a new league, Crucible, which is going to feature both some systems for us to interact with while we level, as well as some systems to interact with specifically in the end game. And that is terrific news. Oftentimes, when there is a new league that is announced, players feel like there's a tension between, is this a league that is friendly for while you're leveling up and growing your early game character? If this is going to be an end game focused league. And when those sorts of leagues get announced, oftentimes there's a tension within the player base. If a league seems to be more leveling friendly, then players complain that there's no endgame options. There's nothing to chase. There's nothing that's aspirational. We've heard that word get tossed around in the Grinding Gear Games and Path of Exile community for the last couple of years. The opposite is true when Grinding Gear Games gives to us what is perceived as an endgame league, where players come out and say, well, it seems like there's no reason to interact with the league mechanic while you're leveling new characters and while you're experiencing the 10-act story campaign, and maybe even while you're experiencing the early portions of the end game in maps. Maybe there's just seemingly a letdown of a league with a new mechanic where it feels like there's not really a big payoff for it until the end game. The reality is not everybody makes it to the end game, and so there's tension exposed there. And what we have with Crucible is neither of these two extremes. Crucible does not seem to be something that is just oriented towards new leveling and new characters and new approaches and the 10-act story campaign, which is not new. But there's something to be said about a league that is coming out that's not oriented towards new characters and campaign gameplay, but neither is it specifically, could we say, an endgame version of a league. There is going to be options for interactions with the league mechanic, whether you're just starting out or whether you are playing far into the aspirational content that is available, and there is a ton of aspirational content that is coming with the Crucible patch. Yesterday during the live stream, while I was reacting and hearing ZD and Chris talk about all of the different features that were coming out and watching the trailer, my first reaction, and something that I have been asking for and hoping for and holding out what little shreds of nostalgic memories that my geriatric brain can hold on to, is Synthesis 2.0. We haven't gotten it since Synthesis was released many, many years ago. It was one of my favorite leagues, not necessarily because of the league mechanics, but because of what Synthesis did for rares and for the economy and for crafting. And it seems to be that in the best ways, Crucible is going to offer some high-end, top-end aspirational styles of crafting that also has some very high risk attached to it, whereas you're on your way to craft maybe what is the best weapon that you personally have ever crafted in Path of Exile, there's a chance for it to end up being that, the best weapon you've ever crafted in Path of Exile, and there's a chance for it simply to brick. That is awesome. So much of what I love about Path of Exile is risk and reward, is managing your expectations versus your hopes, is managing, well, this is a gamble versus what's the payoff. It's that entire system of building tension with inside the player as we make decisions. Should I go with the slow and steady approach towards gaining something that I'm looking at? Like, let's say the divination card system essentially acts as splinters towards unique items, or splinters towards currency items, or splinters towards encounters. Or should I just risk everything and hope that I can get this one aspirational thing in one get-go? For instance, currency, items, etc. It's riskier, but maybe you'll get it. Those tensions are all in play here with Crucible. There's tensions about specific currency items that are going to be available and unique to the Crucible League for crafting purposes. There's going to be encounters. There's going to be boss fights. There's going to be difficult layers of specific monsters that we're going to engage with that are going to have a flavor that specifically come from Crucible. Everything about Crucible seems to be both offering you options to play and interact with the crafting system that is going to be available on your weapons right away as soon as you've got a weapon that's got a passive tree, which that is just, that is the coolest, but also the simplest thing maybe for a league mechanic. Like, you can just imagine folks at the Grinding Gear Games offices are just sitting around going, well, our players really like passive trees. Yeah, they really do. They like spreadsheets too. Yeah, they really do. They really like risk and reward. Yeah, they do. Well, so what if we cram all that onto weapons and just let them play with it for a league? It is going to be incredible. So early on, while you're leveling, you'll be able to interact with the Crucible event. You'll be able to interact and level up and potentially unlock awesome things on a weapon as you're playing through the 10X story campaign and early on into maps. And then late game, you're hopefully going to be able to eventually craft your dream weapon for your build, or maybe potentially, if you're interacting in a trade league environment, craft someone else's dream weapon for their build and sell it for huge time profits. I know that I'm belaboring this point a little bit. This is by far going to be the longest thing that I'm going to stick on and chat about today, the longest single reaction thing. But this league has got all of the promise of whatever Synthesis 2.0. If this league would have come out and simply been named Synthesis 2.0, as Grinding Gear Games has said in the past, hey, we don't want to rename leagues and rename leagues after old leagues because it comes with a lot of baggage. I totally get that. But to me, when I saw the trailer and as I'm looking through and thinking through the systems and the mechanics and what we're able to do, there is no drawback to Crucible. And something was similar about that with Synthesis. Yes, you might lose your item or whatever that you're working on. That is a drawback. There is a risk, right? You might brick your item as you're crafting it and in that process. But we as players are only getting straight added power through this league. That's it. Now, there's lots of nerfs across the board on patch notes. There's plenty of other people who are panicking about that. I'm not commenting on that right now. I'm just talking about player power that's being added through the league mechanic. There is no trade-off here. Grinding Gear Games oftentimes likes to give us as players that tension of, well, if I'm going to use this new thing, there's also a drawback. There's no drawback. We just have an added passive tree onto our weapons that may or may not benefit our build or may or may not benefit someone else's build. And so if we're in a trade league environment, we can potentially sell something that's not valuable to us, but turn it into valuable currency for someone else who will value that item. That is incredible. It means across the board, players, whether you're a top-end crafter, whether you're a top-end trader, or whether you just like to play the game casually and you're a dad with a whole bunch of kids and maybe you're moving states and maybe you're getting a new job and maybe a bunch of things are just out of whack at the moment. You got to sell a house. You got a bunch of chores to do. Maybe I'm getting too specific here. But if you're like that, you're still going to be able to play and enjoy Crucible, okay? So I am absolutely stoked for this league mechanic and the player power that is coming with it. Synthesis did not go core. I do not expect Crucible to go core because literally the best weapons that Path of Exile has ever had in the history of the game are going to get made this league. All right, other things that we're getting this league are 9 new Vaal Gems, which I most famously during Forbidden Sanctum was saying that certain Vaal Gems were just going to be great because they gave mini headhunter effects, and they still turned out to be awful because the skill themselves are awful. I'm not going to comment or make any prognostications or predictions about this. This is just something that's exciting, right? GGG is continually going back and looking at different gems that can get added into and updated with the philosophy and the game design of where GGG is at as they continue on the path towards Path of Exile 2. I would not be shocked if by the time we get to Path of Exile 2, all Path of Exile 1 active skill gems basically had a Vaal Gem version. We're not quite there yet. We're not on that path where everything is going to get it. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if that's the path that we're on. Next up, we're getting Atlas passive improvements, including gateways and a couple of tweaks to different trees on the Atlas passive system. I haven't been able to play much with the Atlas passive system over the last year because I took my hiatus. I took my break from Path of Exile, came back last league and played primarily Ruthless and just wanted to get familiarized with the 10X story campaign again and get kind of my fingers and my mind back into a Path of Exile frame rate. And now what I'm seeing based off of the Atlas passive tree, one of the tensions that I had as I messed around with it in Standard was that it's a very, very big tree, and there are a lot of wasted nodes if you're trying to set up for specific strategies. So these gateways are going to allow you to potentially save a whole bunch of otherwise wasted passives on your Atlas passive tree to get to different spots to farm the style of content that you want to play. And that is a big 2 thumbs up from me. For us as players, for years, we have been asking Grinding Gear Games, please allow us to choose and pick and really curate the style of content that we are playing and interacting with, whether we're in maps or whether we're in campaigns, etc. Let us as players have a choice in what we want to interact with, because we only want to interact with the stuff that we like, and Path of Exile as a game, famously or notoriously, has got oodles of side content. And so we don't want to interact with the side content we don't want to interact with, and we do want to interact with the stuff that we do want to interact with. So give us more options and systems to do that, and gateways are going to allow us to do that more in plenty as we're interacting on the Atlas passive tree and have got more passives that are then spent on side content we want to be interacting with and less on travel nodes. In addition to the 9 new Vaal Gems, we're also getting 1 new active skill gem and 3 new support gems. I can't say right off the bat if these are going to be impactful or not, or just how impactful these are going to be. I will say the one particular trigger gem that they were talking about on the Q&A and that is displayed in the preview, that to me seems fascinating to help with maybe self-casters or maybe even to bring up the damage across the board on casters, to be able to have multiple spells going off via these little trigger guys going around near you. That's fascinating, and I wonder if overlapping spells that can actually deal damage overlapping, if those sorts of trigger guys are going to be, well, just essentially allowing you to almost double your damage, which is what Chris said. He said that there was some penalty for using those trigger guys, but that's just to make sure that you're not purely just doubling your damage just for equipping them. So it's going to be very interesting how the new gems are going to be incorporated into builds that already exist, but also potentially shaping new entire archetypes themselves. We're also getting some vendor shop changes. That was fascinating to me as somebody who plays Ruthless and who levels lots of different characters. Even when I'm playing in a softcore trade league environment, it's always nice to be able to go to the vendor and check and see if there's anything there. And so this is a quality of life change that I recognize for a lot of us endgame players, when we're at, like, you know, level 98 or whatever, who can care, right? Once you get to yellow and red maps, who can care? But even sometimes when you're in white maps or you're early on progressing, maybe you're a hardcore player, maybe you're a solo self-found player, interacting with vendor shops might actually matter, whether it's for a base type or whether it's for something specific that you are looking for other than a base type. This is something that's very encouraging to me. I understand it's not going to get a lot of hype. It's not going to get anybody probably besides yours truly who's out there even mentioning it in their response to the announcement of 321 Crucible. Yet it's this level of detail and this level of care that Grinding Gear Games shows towards older systems to try and modernize and bring things up to speed. This is the sort of stuff that we've been talking about here, at least in the Good Guy Gaming community, for the last couple of years since Path of Exile 2 has been announced, that Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 are essentially going to have to merge at some point, right? They're going to have a shared endgame, 2 different campaigns. And so the game design philosophy from early on in the relatively early 2000s and through the 2000 teens is going to have to merge with game design philosophy here in the 2020s as Grinding Gear Games is designing Path of Exile 2. Those two things are going to have to line up. And this level of care for old systems shows that that's exactly what's happening. We're also getting stack size improvement, so quality of life improvement for alchemy orbs, Vaal orbs, and chaos orbs. This is a big deal for all of us who want to save size, clicking on our wrists because we've got to make huge trades. It's also an economic change. It's going to really shape the economy, I think, depending on how things play out with what players are using on the Atlas map device, which, by the way, essences are on the map device early. So is Abyss, which means players who are looking for Stygian Vises or players who are looking for essence crafting. Both of those are going to be good chaos sinks for the upcoming 321 Crucible League, which means, hopefully, We're not going to see divine prices, being one divine for, what would it be, like, 700, 800 chaos, whatever. But the point is chaos can now stack a lot higher, so we can do a lot higher volume trades than what we could before, which was you were simply limited to 600 chaos in your inventory, and now that has doubled due to the stack size doubling from 10 to 20. That's overall is a good thing, and it's also there for alchemy orbs as well, which means for players who like to do arbitrage trading and who like to move around lots of different currencies and move their essentially their capital into different sources of flow, that they're able to do that at a smoother rate using potentially alchemy orbs as another conversion currency for other sorts of currency, whether that's chaos, whether that's divines, whether that's anything else, something as simple as alterations. In 321 Crucible, we're also getting 2 league reworks. Now, this is something that players have asked for years, and it's something that I am very excited for, specifically because it's Abyss and it's Breach. They're both coming out at the same time. Other gaming companies would go back in time, re-release a game, call it classic, and say, look, guys, we're going to charge you a monthly subscription for this. Or look, guys, it's a new game, but we tweaked the graphics a little bit. Aren't you excited? Grinding Gear Games doesn't pull that kind of shenanigans. Path of Exile is a games as a service model. It is a live game. It is an interactive game where the developers and the community are both giving feedback, interacting with each other, talking things over, listening to each other. I know a lot of players out there think that Grinding Gear Games doesn't listen, but they do. They're always keeping an eye on what the community is responding to and interacting with. And so here we've got 2 old league mechanics that at the times that they came out, they were somewhat controversial and differently received by different player populations and different groups inside the Path of Exile playing community. And yet at the same time, they are both relatively beloved. There are some nostalgia goggles that players have for both Abyss and for Breach. And now what we've got is we've got the Grinding Gear Games team going back, looking at Breach, looking at Abyss, and saying, okay, how would we update this? This is, again, 2 leagues being reworked without us necessarily as a player base going, hey, could you just give us one? This is 2 at the same time. They're both being reworked. This is good news. The density on the video for Breach is absolutely insane. Now, maybe that's the topmost density. Who knows? Maybe that's the, the top rolled density and sextants and all this that are going into that zone. Who knows if that's actually going to be representative of what drops for a Crucible. But if that is representative of what drops with Crucible, then Breach is going to feel dangerous, it's going to feel hectic, and it's going to feel quite fun again to be interacting with Breach. There is nothing that is more sad when you're interacting with Breach than when you pop the Breach and there's like 3 guys rushing at you and you kill them and then you got to wait a couple seconds for a bunch more. It almost feels like an old Elrion mission at that point where you're just waiting for stuff to spawn and you instantly kill it. That's a bummer. Breaches ought to feel like a moment of tense action where you're never quite sure if you're going to die or if you're going to get all of the loot and successfully push that Breach border out to the boundaries of where it could possibly reach. The Abyss changes, I've got to say, are also awesome. The fact that you were always looking at the loading screen, whether or not you were going to get a Lich or whether or not you were just going to get a potential Stygian Spire, that was always lame. It also meant that you were interacting in a zone and going through a zone that you didn't necessarily want to interact with and go through. It made maps feel extra long. And so the fact now that there's just going to be Stygian Spires with no loading screen, no needing to go through, an additional map, as it were, in order to go and get potentially your Stygian Vise to drop or potentially your jewels to drop, that is going to be a big, big deal. And that's always good news for me, especially as a summoner player who loves to have ghastly eye jewels equipped in all sorts of different spots. It's going to be very helpful, believe it or not, for us to be able to streamline that interaction with the Abyss content. And the fact that Liches are now going to be guaranteed when you're actually interacting and going into the depths is always going to be an exciting thing for players when it does pop up. It means, hey, here's my chance to finally interact with the Lich. Believe it or not, I still have players in our Good Guy Gaming Guild that have said over the years they've never actually interacted with a Lich. That's really sad, and hopefully that changes with these Abyss reworks. We are getting 110 new masteries on the tree. As I looked these over on the patch notes, there's several of them that are potentially build enabling or build boosting. Serious game changers for the way how you are constructing and filling out your passive tree, where you're going to want to spend a couple of passive points to go and get some of these masteries. There are others of them that are new that are, of course, not so great. And that's to be expected in a game that's as massive and that's as risky as Path of Exile, where developers are constantly trying to give us as players different opportunities and different stats to play around with to see what we can come up with. And I think because of the 110 new masteries, This is actually somewhat reminiscent of Delirium, when we got just an entire rework and a whole bunch of new passives. A whole bunch of new build archetypes came out with Delirium. I don't think this is going to be quite to that level of extent where whole new build archetypes came out and there were several different ways to approach the game moving forward with Delirium Cluster Jewels. I'm not saying it's going to be to that extent, but it's somewhat reminiscent of that. Whenever there is such a massive change to the passive tree for players to take in, there's going to be lots of different players who are trying things, and it might actually take us a league or two to go, oh, this cluster is actually ridiculously strong, to then also combine and go and get this specific mastery for this particular build archetype. So I think it's probably going to take us a league or two to figure out, but as those new masteries are played with, players are going to find different masteries that are very, very strong and are definitely improvements over the things which were removed from the passive tree in their place. Speaking of things that got added and removed and rearranged, we're getting 11 new cluster type reworks on the passive tree, which means we're going to have to play around a lot with Path of Building even before 321 Crucible comes out in order to mess with and optimize all of our various builds. And that's always an exciting time, right? We're in the midst of hype season. Who doesn't love messing around with Path of Building? It's going to be an exciting week ahead as we count down to Crucible. We're also getting 2 Ascendancy reworks, which shocked me. I thought we were done with Ascendancy reworks until Path of Exile 2. This is another prediction where I have absolutely gotten it wrong. I thought all of the dev team time, all of the resources, all of the creative energies were being put towards Path of Exile 2. Maybe this means the people who are working on Ascendancies and POE 2 are actually kind of like wrapping up their work, or maybe there's other people who are working on Ascendancies and POE 2 who are now taking ideas and sharing them with people who are still working and iterating on POE 1 Ascendancies. Either way, I was absolutely wrong on this. I thought all of our Ascendancies, aside from, numeric adjustments, were done. And so the fact that we're getting 2 reworks, which really essentially means 3 because the Ascendant also gets a little bit of tweaks related to the Sabo and to the Pathfinder, it means that there are still hopes for players to discuss and for players to hope for in the future, maybe in 322, tweaks to their own beloved Ascendancy. So for players who are looking to play Sabo, there's some more options that are available. And for players who are looking to play Pathfinder, which is almost always a strong endgame class to be playing, there's going to be more additional options for you to play. So that's good news across the board for us as players. Well, thanks so much for joining us for today's discussion. I'm excited that it's hype season. I'm excited to be back and playing Path of Exile again. I would love to read down below in the comments what you are most excited for with the 321 Crucible upcoming patch and the announcement. And I'd love to know, what are you most disappointed by? I know that I've said here today, these are just things that I'm excited by. I haven't gone into a long rant about what I'm disappointed by or what potentially is a bummer, what sort of nerfs there are. That'll be for another discussion for another day. But today, I would love to know from you down below what you're excited about and what you're disappointed about for the upcoming 321 Crucible League. I haven't made my decision yet about what I'm going to play. I didn't even get to talk about all of the different things that are coming with Ruthless and all of the different changes that are coming there and improvements, including Eternal Orbs coming to Ruthless. That's just, never thought Eternal Orbs would ever be back in Path of Exile. And now that they're coming back to Ruthless, that is bonkers. Anyway, I haven't made my decision yet about what I'm going to play, if I'm going to play softcore trade, if I'm going to play hardcore trade, if I'm going to play Ruthless, if I'm going to play Solo Self-Found, if I'm going to host a private league. I don't know yet. So if you've got opinions on anything that you'd like to see me playing during those opening couple of weeks for 321 Crucible, I'd love to hear those comments down below as well. Anyway, thanks once again for joining us, and I hope the upcoming 321 Crucible League is the league a Mirror of Calandra drops for you.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.